In July of 2022, a very important deal was negotiated by the United Nations in Turkey, and it also involved Russia and Ukraine, two of the biggest exporters of grain in the world. That deal guaranteed that the grain from three major ports in Ukraine will safely leave for humanitarian reasons to reach the other nations in the world. And since that deal has been put in place, there's been over 20 million metric tons of grain that have moved from Ukraine to the rest of the world. So in this video, we will try to unpack why this deal was important and why the fact that Russia has left the deal is going to compromise food security around the world. We're going to try to understand Russia's position, and we're going to also try to understand Ukraine's position. In order to fully understand the situation, it is therefore key to place each country on the map to understand the strategic impact and why it was necessary that this deal be in place for the rest of the world. That's number one. Number two, I'm going to also explain to you the role that the United States is playing in prolonging this conflict and the result that it would have on food security, primarily on countries that are said to be poor countries. So, what you can see on this map are those three ports that I mentioned, three ports that are key to get the grain out of Ukraine and through the Black Sea, going past Istanbul, the Mediterranean, and then to the rest of the world. The countries involved have all looked at other possibility other than the maritime line and looking at, for example, at shipping on the road, but those are obviously very expensive options, which means that in the near future, the price or the cost of those produce will increase drastically, which will then put further pressure, especially on countries or poor countries around the world. So, why was this deal negotiated? So, how does it work, primarily, first of all? So, the ships that are leaving those three ports then go through Istanbul. In Istanbul, there are um, officers working in tandem with the United Nations. So primarily they are Turkish and they work with the United Nations and they will inspect the ships that are going through and to make sure that the ship is actually a civilian ship and that the ship in question has the right to be in the area to transport the material from Ukraine, as I said, into the rest of the world. And that also means that Turkey, that is also why Turkey has been a big player in the negotiation, because Turkey shares the Black Sea with Russia and Ukraine. Now, in my previous videos, I covered the role of the United States. But today I would like to bring to you a very important update. And I'm going to introduce to you a man who is key. It will help us to understand why the United States' role in this conflict is not going to help us. And it's definitely not going to help Ukraine achieve its goals. And it's specifically later on, I'm also going to touch on why this as long as this conflict prolongs itself, even the European Union or the African continent will also be impacted by this war. This man is Richard Haas. So, who is Richard Haas? He is an establishment figure in foreign policy. In fact, he is the chairman of a think tank called the Council of Foreign Relations in the United States. And he has been the head of that think tank for the past 20 years. He is a man well versed in foreign relations, and in fact, he has also served in both Bush 41 and Bush 43 administration as a national security advisor. And about at the beginning of this month, he gave a very interesting interview to the New York Times, where basically he explains his position. And remember, this man is often asked a lot of questions, but no question is more important than what keeps this man at what keeps him awake at night. And in this interview, his answer was very clear. He says what keeps him at night is the United States. And in fact, here is a direct quote from that interview that he gave at the beginning of this month to the New York Times. Our domestic political situation is not only one that others don't want to emulate, he said in an interview ahead of his last day on the Council of Foreign Relations on Friday. But I also think that it has introduced a degree of unpredictability and a lack of reliability that really poisonous. For America's ability to function successfully in the world, I mean, it makes it very hard for our friends to depend on us. So, you have heard it for yourselves. This is a man who knows very well the situation. And this is what I have been advocating and saying really since the beginning of this conflict. The reality is very simple and it's staring us in the face. Sadly, the Western media does not want to catch up with that reality because it is an uncomfortable one. But basically, in my mind, the United States is in fact the biggest cause of the instability in the world. The time of the unipolar system that was created, shall we say, since the end of the Cold War up until about 2017, that world has ended because in 2017, for the first time, in terms of the GDP um, expressed in terms of purchasing power, China has risen as the biggest economy in the world. And with 1.4 billion people, you can see that it is an almost unlimited potential that they have. And so the United States sees that and they see it as a problem. Okay, so how does that relate to ending the war in Ukraine? And also in terms of understanding the food security in the world and specifically in Africa. So on this graph, you can clearly see for yourselves that since about 2020, just after 2020, the BRICS countries have surpassed the G7, meaning the top Western economies plus Japan, and now are second in comparison to the BRICS nation, where China is basically the biggest economy. And so that represent the biggest challenge to the United States hegemony in the world. And keep in mind that Russia and China are actually closer partners than with the rest of the world. Our next graph actually shows you what is the situation comparatively between the European Union and the United States. Because once again, I have always advocated, again, being a person who lives here in Europe, that at some point the European Union has to divorce itself from the United States. Because as I am recording this video, for example, the European Union has to pay over 4 times the price that it pays for energy, so meaning for oil as well as natural gas to the United States. And I do believe strongly that the United States is in fact deep, very deep into its next forever war. So for all we know, this war can go on for a very, very long time, because it is not in the best interest of the United States to have Europe independent. Because basically, since, as you can see from this map, the European Union, in fact, ran the risk of being like Japan, who for the past 30 years has not grown one bit and has been stagnating for a very, very long time. All thanks to some of those policies implemented by the United States. So, my point is, if you consider, for example, this war, a lot of the refugees who left Ukraine moved into the European Union, which will definitely put more pressure on those nations in terms of services, as they have to welcome millions of people. But again, this isn't the first time. We've seen the United States do that. In fact, if you consider the following conflict in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, in all of those cases, or Iraq even, in all of those cases, the continent that has been left to pick up the pieces has always been the European Union, with migrant influx into those nations, which, in my opinion, has also caused further problems. So clearly, as you can see, back in 2008, the European Union was about 10% larger than the US. Fast forward to 2023 or 2022, which is the last statistic that we have. Now the European Union is only about half of the GDP or the economic size of the United States. Even if you factor in the fact that the UK has left the European Union, you would only be about 50%. So clearly, the United States has a vested interest in making sure that this war will never end, because in doing so, they will always benefit from the cost of raw material such as natural gas and oil to be high as possible. And as of the recording of this video, as I said to you, it is in fact 4 times as high as what they used to pay to Russia. So this is why it is important that the countries are actually split from the United States when it comes to their own safety and to their own in order to promote really prosperity for their own people. So this is what I have advocated for a very, very long time. So since the deal was struck, UN data shows that about 32.9 million metric tons of grain have left the Black Sea. The majority of the grain has been corn and wheat, and they account for 16.9 million tons and 8.9 million tons respectively. Okay, so now the next question that you may ask here is what countries, so how much grain has been, so we covered how much grain has been transported. So what are the essential commodities? So these are corn, wheat, sunflower meal, barley, rapeseed, sunflower oil, and soybeans. In order to put things into context, Russia is number one exporter in the world of grain, and Ukraine is number 5 on the list. So that's why it is super important. So Ukraine is often referred to as the breadbasket of Europe. Okay, so about 50% of its land is arable. And we know that post the invasion now they are roughly number 8 in the ranking for the season 2022 to 2023. Okay, so this is why it is so important, and the position of Ukraine strategically compared to Russia, but also in order to in terms of feeding the rest of the world. So I'm just reading my notes here. So the highest so where did those all those wheat those exports have gone really? So according to the UN, I'm reading here, according to the UN, 45 countries across 3 continents have received food commodity under the deal. The average size of shipment leaving the Black Sea is about 32 32,450 tons. Sorry, my apologies. And the highest tonnage to date has been exported, in fact, to China. So that's 7.96 million tons and almost 25 million of the total. Okay, 25%, sorry, of the total. Followed by Spain, that's 5.98 million tons. Turkey, 3.24 million tons. Italy, 2.1 million. The Netherlands, 1.966, and Egypt, 1.55 million. So, nearly 44% of the export has been shipped to what the UN calls high-income countries. And the rest of them, so about 25%, are made up of countries from poor nations, including countries like Yemen and Ethiopia, where, according to the World Food Program, they are really, really in need of that. So this will help you understand the position better and understand why this conflict need to be to be brought to an end as quickly as possible. But as in my previous video where I looked at it, I don't believe that the United States will even try to do that in the years to come, because it feeds into the military industrial complex. It feeds into the hawkish attitude towards China. And quite frankly, they actually also don't care about the other countries, the little people, shall we say. So this is why I believe that it is very important that at some point people come together to negotiate a solution, a compromise that will then help relieve some of the pain and the pressure that those countries are actually experiencing. So I'm reading here. So according to the World Food Program, pre-war Ukraine produced enough food to feed 400 million people per year. In 2021, almost two-thirds of the UN Food Agency overall grain procurement came from Ukraine. The UN says the deal allowed the WFP to transport more than 725 tons of wheat to help people in need in countries hit by wars and extreme weather events. So countries like Ethiopia received more than a third of that, with more than 20% going to Yemen and 18% to Afghanistan. So you have Somalia, 25,000. You have Djibouti. You have Kenya, 25,000. You have Sudan in Africa. I'm talking about specifically Africa. And all those countries are now facing hunger. Now, that is the situation that as it is currently. And sadly, as I've said before, all those countries do not want to actually resolve the issue. And that what bothers me. And I really, really hope for the sake of these countries that a deal will somehow be struck and that we will come or they will pen a deal and the deal will be signed and that the war will end. Because there are several countries that are going to face hunger in the coming month if this deal is not restored, number one, in the immediate term, and then secondly, for the war to end. Because Ukraine needs to rebuild its infrastructure in terms of food, in terms of agriculture. I'm sorry. And Russia also needs to continue its production. So that's why I believe that it is urgent, more urgent than before, to actually come to a conclusion on this war. But maybe Richard Haas is correct that is also in my opinion, that the United States has no interest in actually ending this war, that the United States will continue to support this war until the end, even though they know that there isn't actually any strategic interest for them in that region except to cause problems to Russia. So there you have it, people. I hope that with this you are able to understand better the context for yourselves and that you will stay informed in the future. So my name is Anthony Mukanya. If you like my channel, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I will see you next time. Peace.